morning, everybody. Welcome to a cup of coffee on a Saturday morning. Double D, D Squared podcast here, talking to you regarding Comet basketball. And Dave, last night's game reminded me of Muncie Central in 1954 taking on Milan High School, population 161. In the movie Hoosiers, the game that movie Hoosiers was depicted from that game. It was a slow-paced game, 15-15 at halftime. I think you said one bucket in the second half, and that game had like I said, that game had a feel of times past. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it was certainly a defensive battle. The Comets only gave up 21 points, which is I'm pretty sure that's the fifth. It's tied for the fifth fewest points the Comets have ever given up in program history. And like you said, the Marquette Explorers only hit one field goal in the second half. So, yeah, it really just a defensive, kind of a grudge match. And really, honestly, I think a really pleasing sign that the Comets were able to come out on top in such a defensive battle.
You know, I was thinking last night, watching Comet sports pretty faithfully over the last decade, and then doing some historical research. Thanks for that piece. I was wondering last night if that might have been some record in the second half, and thanks for getting us up to date with that. But, you know, we're pretty fortunate. Todd Squared there in football and basketball, you know, one of the things they're very consistent in doing in their coaching is they always seem to be able to put together a pretty good defensive performance week after week. And they're both very consistent with it. You know, I remember one possession, it might have been like the second or third possession of the game. I thought Alton Marquette was going to hold it the rest of the half.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was thinking, man, that would just not be fun as a defender. And I'm watching the Comets, and they're just right there on every pass. You know, it had to be a good 40, 50 second, possession there by Alton Marquette. And it just right there, it just kind of hit me. You know, the Comets are always playing pretty good defense in both basketball and football. It just struck me last night.
Yeah, Coach Cantrell is excellent at teaching, specifically help side defense. The Comets have always been really, really strong at that. And if you notice early in the game and then just before halftime, they switched it up and gave Marquette a 2-3 zone look. Just to throw something new at them. I really like that, especially before the half. You've kind of lulled them to sleep with your classic man-to-man help side defense, and then force them to do something different headed into halftime. And they got to stop there. So you're right, really traditionally good at defense. And I think just to maybe add some context to this, you're right, really long defensive possessions last night. And that's really tough, especially given the circumstances of the year. You know, they played on Wednesday. They lost a really close game, 51-50, I believe, to Hillsborough. And then just to be able to come back, you know, 2 days later on Friday and be able to put together a long, hard-fought game, that's really impressive. And it really says something maybe about the conditioning, but also just about the fundamentals that the Comets have at their, hand.
Yeah, I thought there in the second half, I'm trying to think about how to say this, but I would say the turning point was the Comets getting a few steals on defense that led to breakaway points for them. But the way I would phrase that, the way I was thinking about it is it was the persistent defensive positioning, ball pressure over time that seemed to wear down a young Alton Marquette team, and that's what led to the steals. It's not like the Comets are just bursting with speed and quickness all over the place. We certainly have some players that have that, But I didn't think that was last night's game. What I thought last night's game was this persistent pressure over time that really wore down a young team. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and you can see that, especially if you look at sort of the runs of the game. So what I saw, the Comets went on a 17-0 run from about the 2:34 mark in the third quarter, and they held Marquette scoreless until about the 3:06 mark in the fourth. And so, like you said, that just really illustrates, in my opinion, what it takes to face pressure, time after time down the court. That's really wearing, and you could sort of see Marquette wear out throughout the game, and then the Comets were able to go on that long 17-0 run, and that essentially put the game out of order for Marquette. And you're right, it's just taxing to face pressure time after time after time. And on the flip side of that, Marquette's sort of known this year to be that pressure team. They pressed early, and Fletcher Manhart really faced pressure from 90 feet from the hoop most of the game. Yeah. I think that really says a lot about him and his ball control and how much the Comets trust him just to be able to handle that pressure. Because as from a former player's perspective, it is wearing to face that time after time after time.
Yeah, I thought Alton Marquette was coached well. They seemed disciplined and fairly fundamental. Anytime you can just simply handle the ball, make passes, make cuts, get open against really good defense by the Comets. I was impressed with Alton Marquette. It was interesting, their style of play. Being a guy coming from Indiana with no shot clock and all four classes playing together, I've always kind of enjoyed the slowdown game. We all grew up in that in the 70s and 80s. You make 10 passes and then have a little bit of blood coming down from the corner and then take a shot from the elbow. That's the way we used to play the game. But that's no longer really something anybody ever sees unless they get on YouTube and do a search for the 70s or 80s style of basketball. And we saw that last night. And I was impressed that Alton Marquette, could play that style in today's game. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that or not.
Yeah, I think I wish I had a shot chart of last night's game for Marquette. You're right, they do sort of speed it up, and in some ways it's sort of similar, in my opinion, to what Coach Barber does at the college, is, that, layups or threes mentality. Yeah. They took a handful of mid-range jumpers, but other than that, took a lot of threes, and they drove the ball hard to the hoop. I think that is an interesting analytical strategy in today's game. I'd say it's sort of modern. But unfortunately for them, they just weren't hitting last night. And when you're not hitting, using that philosophy, especially from deep, you're going to struggle to keep up. And yeah, I thought the Comets did a really nice job in the second half of sort of switching the flow of that game. They made Marquette guard on the other end. They made them suddenly guard for longer and longer and longer periods of time. And they ran offense well, really intentional. They were suddenly, the Comets in the second half were more of that 10 passes team. What's the best look we can get? I think that was also part of that taxing process that helped wear down the Explorers.
Yeah. We're in this NBA part of the high school season where you're playing 3 games a week. And I keep thinking to myself, I wonder if this is going to have long-term impact on high school basketball. And what I mean by that is, are we going to enjoy playing so many games in a confined area that it's going to impact future scheduling for high school sports? Probably not. I mean, we'll probably go back, but it is fun. I mean, it is fun to think about, okay, we got another game on Monday. I mean, for me, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's probably not as fun. It wouldn't be as fun for me if I was in Coach Cantrell's shoes, because you got to turn around and play again, and you got to, you have less time to prepare, and you end up not really working on improving your team necessarily. You work on preparing your team to play the opponent. And it's a different type of practice.
Yeah.
It's another thing that our coaches here in Greenville, really get overlooked. I mean, I think, I know you went on to play college. My son went on to play college. We've had several, kids come from the small town and go on and play in college. And I know my son would say he felt really prepared every single game. And our coaches just do a really good job of game prep against opponent. Yeah. They study it. They work together, in creating a good game plan. And you really saw that last night. But I just wonder, we got to hope that Coach Cantrell can get enough sleep, during the next 4 to 6 weeks to be able to do this every day,
Yeah, I think on one hand, you're exactly right. It's a ton of fun from a spectator's perspective to go and to watch. Yeah. You're going to have 3 games a week, and that is awesome. And I'd also say it's pretty fun for the kids and coach in some ways to know that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday you're going to have something. Yeah. The con to that is, though, if you were to look at the season as a whole, the longevity of it, and you were to, sort of try to chart improvement, it'd be, in my opinion, tougher to do. You walk into practice on Tuesday and you think, well, what can I do with the team? Because we play again on Wednesday, Yeah. What drills are available at my disposal anymore? And I just think that's really difficult. The season becomes, less of like a developmental period and more of sort of a marathon, who can outlast the other. But you're right. I think this is an adjustment for every coaching staff. It's Greenville's always really valued time between, especially conference games, to prep for conference opponents, to have a really thorough scouting report. And, we have a veteran coaching staff, and they now have the ability to condense that into a day. And I think that's really impressive. And you can see it every game that the Comets walk onto the court prepared, at least knowing every personnel that the other team has, and then also a couple sets. And that's difficult to do day in and day out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this will be the challenge. I remember being really surprised when Bobby Knight asked former coach of Indiana, this was a really surprising thing. They asked him, why were you so successful in postseason basketball in the NCAA tournament? Because he went through a few years there where he made some nice runs in the late 70s and early 80s. He won 3 national championships kind of every 3 or 4 years. And even when he wasn't winning, he was doing well in the tournament. He said, practice less.
Yeah.
And that totally surprised me, being a prep coach. And so I think the challenge is going to be, when you look at the entire season, this is going to be an athletic challenge for the entire athletic department, because we're a small school and these same kids, Schaufelberger's, in 5 weeks here, Dave, he's going to have to take the tank top off and put on shoulder pads.
Yeah.
And he's not the only one. I'm using him as an example. And so if we're not careful, and we don't work together, and, you're going to potentially run into some problems, because you're going to have to think through, how do I game prep? But practice is going to look so much differently in order to have good energy at the end. And I think the coach that is smart, in our conference, will probably be the one that ends up, being really strong at the end. It may not be the amount of time on the floor in practice. It may be the team, as Bobby Knight said, that practices the least. Interesting thought.
Yeah, that's something, I became really, you learn that, especially in college. You play, I think we'd always play 30. We play close to 40 games a year in college. And once you get into the season, your practices are really condensed. Yeah. You can no longer go 2 hours. Your body just can't take it. There's suddenly, a lot of 90-minute practices, some 60-minute practices, and you're doing some unique things. You'll have practices that really emphasize athletic movement, stretching, or lifting. And you just got to be creative. I think as we learn more
Yeah.
about how the body handles stress, I think coaches have become really wise to how to treat their athletes. And, you know, I don't think the Comets are any different. I think Coach Cantrell, Coach Dahl really attuned to that.
Yeah.
And I think if any coaching staff will be able to make that adjustment well, it's them. They've actually always, ever since I've been there, they've always really emphasized stretching and hydration, and you know, honestly, a little bit ahead of their times, because it's really it's sort of new school, because you know, old school would be like, we've got to grind 3 hours every practice, and that's just really, I don't know if you can do that this year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Dave, good talking with you. It was, you know, I love sport to death, and last night just gave you a different picture. 15-15 at halftime, only 6 points for Marquette. I feel sorry for him from that standpoint, but just a different look at the game being played differently is always fun and always fascinating for me, instead of seeing the same types of things over and over again. This group's a fun group to watch. I look forward to continuing having these conversations with you over a cup of coffee on Saturday morning. It's D squared. Go Comets.